I'm going to show you the game between Vidit Gujarati and Jordan van Foreest from round 4 of the Tata Steel tournament. Before we get underway, remember, if you're not a subscriber to the channel, then do click on the subscribe button. It's free to subscribe, and click on the bell for instant notifications of when I post a new video. So, the game. Vidit, 24 years old, from India, one of the great prospects from India. He's, well, crossed over the 2700 level. He's just below that at the moment, but a very strong grandmaster, and I have no doubt that he'll be joining the elite level soon. His opponent, Jordan van Foreest from the Netherlands, 19 years old. Now, he's rated a fair bit below the others in this tournament. Well, he's still rated over 2600, so he's a strong grandmaster. But I think this game shows the difference in technique between a decent grandmaster and a very strong one. So it's a Catalan. I'm going to rush through the opening of this game. They've reached an endgame very quickly. Used to be thought that this endgame presented real difficulties for black. I once had this endgame as black in the British Championship when I was very young, and I lost against Jonathan Spielman, who was a real specialist in this line. I just couldn't tame white's piece activity. You can see the difference between this bishop on g2 and the bishop on d7. So white has a slight structural disadvantage, but that's offset by the piece play, which is very dangerous. However, since the days when I was trying to defend this position with black, this whole endgame has been researched thoroughly and played thoroughly in many games. And the position they've arrived at here has already been played in several top-level games. And basically this is the absolute correct way to neutralise white's initiative. And it's interesting that van Foreest was playing his moves almost instantly. He'd obviously prepared this extremely well. Now they're on their own territory. So this is fresh territory, but clearly still absolutely in the book of van Foreest. So he's played his rook here, very accurate move. He wants to put it to c7, and he's going to get pressure on the c4 pawn. So Vidit just had to exchange, and I'm going to rattle through these moves pretty quickly. Basically, white doesn't have any advantage to speak of now because black threatens to get pressure here. And knight d5, you can see black is straightening his pieces out. Best that white can do is exchange, but I mean, there really aren't any difficulties here at all. This knight could become nicely active on one of these squares, depending on how white plays. Rook b8, good move, and white even has to be a little bit careful here because of the activity of the rook. You know, it might, for example, if bishop c3, well, I mean, knight b4 is possible, but maybe rook b6 and can come over here. So Vidit decided to just liquidate here. And now they're trading pawns. So although white wins the pawn on c5, it doesn't really mean much in this position. So this is the game continuation. I'm going to speed through this, and we reach an endgame with bishops of opposite colour. Now, we know that with bishops of opposite colour, the drawing tendency is very strong. But there are a few tricks, and it's worth examining this endgame in a little bit of detail. I know this isn't the kind of usual game that I cover on my channel. You know, there are lots I love looking at the attacking games. But this endgame, well, there's more to it than meets the eye, as we're going to see. So Vidit, a pawn up. The problem with these bishop of opposite coloured endgames is that, for example, if a king blockades this pawn, then it's not possible to dislodge the king from a light square. Likewise, if a bishop blockades on this square, or even c8. So the king comes over to stop the c pawn. And Van Foreest still playing pretty quickly. Now this pawn advances, but it's not going to get further than the 7th rank because the king blockades. Now the first question is, what happens if this bishop dives into the pawns on the king side? Well, actually it's not a problem, because after this you can take this pawn, but black will scoop the pawn on c6, and actually, well, with pawns all on the same side, that's a pretty easy draw. So Vidit instead advances his king. Van Foreest plays bishop c2 very quickly, and now h4. Now this is White's only chance to try and press on the king side with his pawn, so the h-pawn advances. But Van Foreest plays instantly the pawn to h5, king e3. Now, this is actually a critical position. It's very hard to imagine that right at this point, almost at the start of this endgame, that black has to play very carefully. Van Foreest played bishop a4, which looks like a very natural move to attack this pawn. We'll come on to the game continuation in a second, but let's have a look at bishop d1. This is the best move, preventing White's king from advancing here, because then simply bishop takes pawn. So let's push the bishop away. I mean, clearly moving this bishop or advancing the pawn gets nowhere, so we'll play king d2. So the bishop goes away. Okay, let's give a check. And king d7. Well, White could return with king e3, but bishop d1, and the king can't move very fast. So in order to get anywhere, White really has to advance the e-pawn. It's possible to play g4, but well, it's basically will transpose to the line we're about to look at. Basically, if White wants to get anywhere, then it's vital to move the king forward. So e4, and you can't do that without moving this pawn. So black waits, and White brings the king up. And, well, let's say king f4. We'll play bishop d1. And now g4. Obviously, if king g5, then we can just play bishop takes pawn here. So g4, and we'll just play g6. So g6 would have been the response to g4 earlier anyway. And there's no way through, because if king g5, we just take this. No difficulty. Or pawn takes pawn, and once again, king g5 is met by bishop takes f3. Let's try another move. So this position, we'll try f4 this time. Well, let's go bishop c6. So we're putting pressure here. And if the pawn advances, then there's, well, really nothing doing there at all. So we'll play g4. Let's see what happens here. So we can take this, and now f5. Let's take that. Now the idea is to create a passed pawn with f6 and then advance the h-pawn. But let's play g6 and shut this out. Now, this might be a familiar kind of position to you. So king f4. Still got to be careful. So if pawn takes pawn, then this pawn is going to go through. So let's just wait. Bishop a4. Fine. Allow white to take that. Bishop c2. So if pawn takes pawn, we just play pawn takes pawn, and white has absolutely no way through because that pawn is protected by the bishop. So instead, white plays king g5. Be careful. Bishop takes pawn and h5, and white wins. Because if pawn takes pawn, then king takes bishop, and otherwise pawn is going through. But instead of taking, and I should say if pawn takes pawn, then we can play, well, king f4 or bishop f4. It doesn't actually matter. King f4 here, here, here. Well, we'll play bishop f4. Yeah, it doesn't actually matter. And then the pawn goes through. Sorry, let me just come back. So, bishop d3, we just wait. And now there is absolutely no way through for white. There's nothing happening at all. In this position, well, again we wait. So bishop takes pawn, h5, but we just wait on this diagonal. And if king takes pawn, then we can play bishop takes, and again, stone cold draw. Those of you with a good memory might recall that this is exactly the same motif that we saw in game 11 of the World Championship match, Carlsen against Caruana. That's yeah, game 11. I'll remind you in a second. So let me see. Let's come back to this position. So bishop d1. This is very important. Bishop a4 played in the game. Now it's amazing, but this is insufficient to draw the game. g4. Now if pawn takes pawn, then black has a problem because we're going to create a passed pawn here. So let's say bishop f6 to prevent g5. But now the bishop comes to f8. So if king takes pawn, then we've got bishop takes, and well, let's just see that here. And well, bishop takes pawn will be two connected passed pawns, and if f5, then this is very awkward. They will be winning. So g6, but then h6, threatening to push again. So g5, but now the bishop will return to d6. Okay, so e4 threatened. Bishop d6, so holds the pawn. And now the trick is this. This is very nice. The king is going to come to b6 to hold the pawn, and then the bishop is free to attack these pawns, and that's going to be winning basically. If f5, then bishop e5, and yeah, well, it's basically a winning position. Let's go back here. So Van Foreest played g6 and the king came in. Now, what about bishop d1 in this position? This was not played. This is very interesting. Here we take and king g5. Bishop takes pawn, and you can see black doesn't have enough time. He can't save this pawn. Just one tempo too late. So here the pawn is going to go through, and black will have to sacrifice the bishop, and then this bishop is actually able to hold the pawns. Well, white's king will should be able to take one of them anyway, but that's a winning position. So in the game, bishop b5, well, it's sort of similar, because this would transpose after bishop takes pawn. Okay, that covers this square, so king takes bishop is now a threat. Well, first of all, Vidit exchanged on h5. If king takes, then obviously the pawn will go through. So pawn takes pawn. Bishop dropped back, just out of the way. And now we have this exchange. Well, white has nothing better. And we can see how this works in practice. f6 played. King here. e5. Well, if bishop takes, then just king takes pawn, and the king will come back here. And well, first of all, king g5, and the pawn will go through. And let's go back here. So e5 played. So Van Foreest is doing this in order to capture the pawn on c7. And here white is just in time. This is very important. There's only one winning move here, and that's bishop d6 to prevent black's king from coming over. And here I'm afraid this is impossible to defend. Pawn rolls through, king f6 prevents king f7, and here Jordan van Foreest resigned. A very unfortunate position. The pawn will advance, the king comes here, the pawn comes here. We play this one, and then the f-pawn just goes through to queen. Well, that's a bit of a shocker. Let me just remind you of that World Championship game very quickly. So this position, this is Carlsen Caruana game 11. You can see opposite coloured bishops. Now the pawn isn't on c7, but it's on c5, and has dragged black's king way over from the king side. And Carlsen tried this, and you can see the similarity. So basically the bishop alone has to defend those kingside pawns, but Caruana, well, he had this under control completely. He knew exactly what he was doing, and actually spent very little time. He spent enough time just to try and check the position, but he knew exactly what he was doing. In this position, f5, well, you remember it now. Bishop b1, and exactly the same drawing mechanism that we've just seen in the Vidit Van Foreest game. There you go. There is a big difference between these elite levels and the levels just under. It's the maintaining concentration for the full game, absolutely vital. Van Foreest had done everything right, but just in one moment in that bishop endgame, he lost it. and the game had gone. So we have in the lead after 4 rounds Jan Nepomniachtchi with 3 points, Vidit, Ding and Anand and Giri on 2.5. Thanks for watching.